So we'll get started. So page 19. Today's page in the manual is about motivation, goal setting, and going for it. It's also the first time we have a guest joining us on the pod, which I'm so excited for. It's actually nice. We didn't quite plan it this way, but I am by myself today without my co-pilot because he's under the weather. So I'm happy that we unintentionally planned to have a guest for this podcast so that I don't just have to talk to myself for an hour. So when we first started recording the instruction manual, I'd had a few listeners ask us if we'd ever consider interviewing other people. And today's guest was the first person that immediately came to mind. I can't think of a better person to talk to us or to me today about today's topic. So I met our guest today years ago when we both worked for the same land ambulance service, the one that I currently still work for today. He's actually the person that motivated me to take up indoor rock climbing because his adventures of outdoor rock climbing and the community he created around it inspired me. He has worked for multiple EMS services in 3 different provinces slash territories, I guess 2 provinces, 1 territory. And he completed his way up to CCP level education. So for anyone that doesn't know what that is, that's critical care paramedic. Just to give a little background on EMS for our non-EMS listeners, most people start at primary care, then you would do some additional coursework to work your way up to advanced care level. And then above that is critical care, which not even every service offers. A lot of the time they're strictly involved with flight. Outside of that, he has cycled across Canada, west to east, 4,600 kilometers, completely self-supported, and completed that in 75 days. He's completed a half Ironman. He has completed a 65-kilometer mountain ultra race, climbing 3 mountains in under 16 and a half hours. And in 2021, he successfully climbed Mount Logan on his first attempt. So for anybody that doesn't know what Mount Logan is, it's Canada's tallest peak and the second tallest in North America. And if that wasn't impressive enough, he also filmed the expedition and worked for almost 2 years to turn it into a documentary. In 2022, he was accepted into the Banff Mountain Film Festival Filmmakers Workshop and was one of 18 participants to learn from world-renowned filmmakers in a 10-day intensive workshop. His documentary, entitled Logan, has since had 5 showings across Canada. And honestly, I wanted to have him on the pod because he's a person that just inspires you by being in his presence. I'm forever grateful to still be in contact with him years after we've met and to call him a friend. And without further ado, without further ado, let's start talking to John Bestfather. Hi, John.
Wow, what an intro. Holy smokes. Thanks, Jenna. Wow, that's great. And Father Ado. I mean, that's a new one. That's
Without
great.
further ado, how's it
Yeah, that
going?
it's going great. I just got off a big stint of work today, and then I headed to Louise to do some skiing. So I actually got to ski in some really great powder today.
Amazing.
And so that always puts everybody in a good mood, right? So
Are you still doing ski patrol out there as well?
I'm not doing ski patrol. We just have a program because I work for Banff VMS. We have a program where we carry a radio in exchange for sort of a pass at the hill, and then we carry some drugs and things like that. So ski patrol attends most of the injuries and people that are hurt. But if they're serious or require an ambulance, they'll call us on the radio. We'll come down and we can sort of provide on scene or on the hill care, and then we're passing it off to our colleagues. So that's kind of the system we have set up.
Gotcha. It's pretty sweet to be able to, yeah, like enjoy your hobby while you're also pseudo working, but kind of just like enjoying it unless nothing pops up.
Oh, it was great. I mean, I got a ton of turns today in great powder and then helped one patient. I mean, I couldn't ask for something better today. So that was great.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when I was kind of envisioning doing this pod, like one of the things I wanted to talk to you about the most was just your documentary. Obviously, climbing it like an amazing accomplishment and an amazing feat. Um, but never mind then filming it while you were doing it is it's a whole separate accomplishment. So I feel like I kind of wanted to start today by just talking about the Logan documentary in general. Um,
Absolutely.
so like so for I mean, I would encourage everybody, and I'll put out a plug at the end of the podcast for how they can find the documentary, and would certainly encourage everybody to go watch it. So some of this information might be just in there. But for anybody that hasn't seen it, maybe just start by taking us through how you decided you even wanted to climb Logan, and then how you started to plan for that. Because I imagine this is like multiple months, if not years, of planning. And so to me, even just thinking about taking an idea that's that big and grandiose and breaking it down into like tangible, smaller actions and plans, like take us through how that kind of happened.
Absolutely. And are you asking more about the climb itself or the making of the movie or both?
Both, but start with the
Okay.
climb. Start with the
Okay.
climb.
Yeah, because they are two very separate things. They obviously are entangled with one another, but
Mm.
um, I moved to the Yukon in 2018, and my really good friend Chris, his buddy down the street was named Ryan, who went on to become sort of my climbing partner and kind of expedition leader for this climb. Ryan has quite the history of with Mount Logan and attempts, and I won't get too much into that because there's a lot of that in the documentary itself. But Ryan and I became close friends as well. We'd walk down the street and go have potlucks at his place with, my dog and Chris and everybody, and it was great. And we'd ice climb together, and I could tell he was a very, took this stuff seriously and really liked it, and had a heap of experience that I had never climbed a high altitude mountain. I'd done lots of climbing my entire life, rock climbing, both sport and trad climbing, ice climbing, and some mountaineering and glacier travel and that sort of stuff, and backcountry skiing. But I'd never sort of done anything in a high altitude level, and something where altitude will actually affect you. Um,
Can I ask you a
so
quick question about that?
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
What's considered high altitude?
Hmm. It's a good question. You know, uh, when most people think high altitude, they'll think like the really big mountains, really high mountains around the world, the mountains at over 8,000 meters, where you're
Okay.
entering something called the death zone, where, on Everest, most people take oxygen with them, that sort of stuff. But high altitude, I mean, I would argue, above 10, 12, 15,000 feet, you're getting into high altitude,
Okay.
because the effects of altitude sickness, above that 10,000 feet, you're going to feel those effects. So anytime you're doing that, and also I would say at any point you're going to try a mountain that you have to let yourself adjust for altitude, that would be more of a high altitude peak.
Okay.
Mount
Understood.
Logan is just under 6,000 meters, 5,000 or 5,959 meters. So, like you said, second highest in North America next to Denali. But it is a high altitude peak.
Okay. So you meet Ryan, you guys find you jive, you have similar interests, you decided he's equally as dedicated to sport as you are.
I would say for Logan in general, he's more dedicated than I am.
Yeah.
I was curious and interested in pushing into high altitude mountaineering to give it a try before even moving. And so this, becoming friends with Ryan, I think after a certain amount of time, I felt sort of able, or felt like I was okay to approach him and ask him if he would consider climbing again, which was an obvious yes to him because he had never summited the mountain, um, and wanted to do it again. But it's a big ask. So I approached him. We talked a lot about the realities of the climb, different things, challenges, and sort of then talked about teammates and how that would look. And luckily, we both volunteered on a sort of a heli search and rescue group in the Yukon. And there was another gentleman there, Justin Wallace, who we both knew, and Ryan knew him really well. They used to train together a lot in the gym. So suddenly a team was born, and this was actually in uh, probably 2019, because we were aiming to climb in 2020. And I'm sure most people will understand what happened is COVID
What
hit.
happened? What
Yeah.
happened in early
Um,
2020?
yeah, did not don't have to go into all that, but we had actually been training, like physically training together, in 2019, like in November, December, January leading up. And I don't think we found out until probably March that the parks were not, because it's a national park, Kluane National Park, that they weren't issuing any parks that year or any permits that year. So it was unfortunately off, and that was a pretty big pill to swallow.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But
Well,
I got to
no,
say, felt pretty privileged to be upset about, oh, we can't go climb our mountain when there's this big virus everywhere. I mean, it's how it is.
that's perspective. But I can only imagine the letdown of just like, I would like to ask you about your training, both physical and mental for it too. But when you've put so much of yourself, like physically and mentally, into training, to then have this thing that's completely out of your control, be like, womp womp, sorry, like that must have been devastating.
It was pretty tough, and I mean, we kind of had hints that was going to happen. It was a uncertain time for a lot of people, and I remember when we did sort of get the email and read it, we were all like actually on a Zoom call, just like this,
Yeah.
and kind of like, oh, and it was, we were upset, but I didn't. I don't think we were overly upset. It was just the reality we had to deal with, and a lot of us were focused on other things and each other's health and things like that. Um, I would say that probably with hindsight now, it was maybe a good thing, at least from my perspective, that it gave me more time to prepare, and both physically, mentally, and also with considering the film and that sort of stuff. So I think it was a good thing looking back.
Hmm. Interesting. So, yeah, I just have so many questions. So, because we're talking about like the physical and the mental training of it, like what does training for something like this look like? Like you're obviously doing, I guess, less intense climbs to prepare. You're doing a lot of gym work. Like how often a week are you working out? How often are you getting out on the mountains? Like what does it take to like physically train for something like this?
It takes a lot. I sort of had two sort of variations of this. When I was up in the Yukon, I was actually training with Ryan and Justin. We had a trainer that Ryan had used, and it's a lot of step ups. It's a lot of like power workouts. It's a lot of like 3 or 4 times a week, or quite a lot. With my schedule being a flight medic, I was away a lot, so she actually designed a bit of a different program for me. But when 2020 didn't happen, I actually moved down here to the Bow Valley in Canmore, Alberta. And then the subsequent year, 2021, is when we actually went on the expedition. So in the fall, winter of 2020 is when I actually got a coach from down in the States, same coach that Ryan did. These guys from Uphill Athlete, they were fantastic. And so I actually had like every day pretty much an activity that I was doing. Now, it's not to say that for this you have to have a coach or you have to have such an intense program, but you absolutely want fitness because of the altitude where this mountain is. You can't just be dropped off like in the Himalaya. You can go climb other peaks and acclimatize. Logan, you're just dropped off with a ski plane on a glacier and you're there, and then you're just going up. So
Right.
there's no acclimatization period, and the best way you can prepare your body to do that is to be more physically fit, both your endurance, your muscular endurance, your strength, so your body utilizes oxygen better, it doesn't build up as much lactic acid, all that sort of stuff. That's the best way. So I had a pretty rigorous program that built basically was a three-tiered program, mainly building aerobic base at the start, then building up muscular strength, and then muscular endurance. And it was a different way at looking at fitness than I had. I'd always been very fit in my life and always been sort of training, but I learned a ton about overtraining and how to properly train and manage with heart rate. So keeping heart rates lower and that sort of stuff. I mean, I know you and I could just go crazy into training talk,
We can get
but it's pretty
wild. I
good.
mean, you're like dangling the carrot right now
I
where
know. I know.
I want to get into it. But so I guess more of the question I have regarding the physical fitness, because I know how hard you train and these like super long sessions that you'll do. I'm actually more curious about the rehab part of it because that's also something we've talked about on here a couple times, and you and I just separately in phone calls about, the importance of stretching and rehabilitation and rest. And I can only imagine when you're so busy like you are and you want to take on these like crazy like cardiovascular training sessions and like physical feats. um you're smarter and you know better, so you know how important rehabilitation is. But I think that's a thing that a lot of people get sidetracked by, right? Like if I only have so many hours in a day and I want to feel like I'm pushing myself, like how do you make the time for the rehab, or was there like a specific rehab component of the training that you had to adhere to?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very good point, and it was a huge learning point for myself. The uphill athlete sort of like curriculum, which is not their own, they've just grabbed things from all sorts of different sports and coaching and put it and package it kind of together. So it's not they didn't invent the wheel here. But one of the biggest takeaways was training makes you weaker, recovery makes you stronger.
I
And
love that.
understanding that when you push yourself and you're working out hard, and I would say I know you're a type A like me, we instead of like, oh, and we're here to talk about motivation, which I have a whole bunch of things to say, but
Yeah.
when you're in it and you train hard and you're like, yeah, love it, train hard, keep going, and you're one of those people that will never miss their workout. I used to do this thing where I was running down a trail and there was a left and a right, and left was longer and right was like shorter. I'd always like nervous, like I picked that left hand longer trail because I was terrified that one day I would choose the shorter trail and I'd always keep shooting, it'd be
Oh,
this downward
same.
spiral. um but this curriculum, so while doing the training and coaching program, when I was really tired or exhausted, and now this isn't always physical, and this is something that's really been a huge learning point. When I come back from, say, a long shift of 12 hours or 14 hours after I commute, and I'm exhausted, and you feel tired, or say you had a hard week, you moved, or you had some relationship stuff, or all that stuff, you feel tired. You just know you're tired, and you're sort of lagging going to that workout. One of the biggest takeaways for me was you should actually rest. And I did make myself implement this because I was being coached, and I'm like, well, I got to buy into this program, right? And it's sort of saying if you're going to train when you're in that state, like you're not going to get any benefit. So I'd rest the next day, do my run, and I could tell because when you got the heart rate monitor on, when I'm like letting off the gas when I run, I could really quickly see my heart rate drop, which would show I'd be pretty rested. And that was a huge difference from having to rest when I was tired the night before than if I just pushed through and had a tired workout where I could see my heart rate just continually staying high or climbing higher.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much interesting science that's coming out about that, and a little bit of it is above me. Um, if Johnny was on the call with us today, I know he'd have a whole side tangent to go on about heart rate variability because he's become like very interested in learning about that and follows a lot of what like Peter Attia teaches and like talks about. That's not quite my domain, so I don't have a lot to add to that, but yeah, it's interesting. I can definitely relate for myself in the sense of if you're a type A motivated person and there's only so many hours in a day, which I feel like you really feel when you're a shift worker, like you're saying, same schedule for me. You have 12 hours in your workday if you get off on time. Sometimes it's 12 and a half, 13, 14 hours. Plus you factor in a commute. Plus, you're trying to take care of your physical and mental health. So you're like, well, when I get home, I have to change immediately. And then I can't possibly just do a 20-minute workout. Like, I have to do this 90-minute intensive vinyasa
Yeah,
practice because that's what motivated people do. And it really is, and there's time to push, right? Like there is time
correct.
where you sort of have to, I think, do a mental assessment and sort of figure out like, okay, is this a day where I need to conquer my inner bitch? Like, am I just kind of like dragging my heels because I'm
Yeah,
being a little bit lazy and I don't want to need it and I don't like, I don't, I need to persevere through that?
totally.
Or is this a time where I genuinely need to like listen to my body and my body's trying to speak to me and I'm just blatantly ignoring it when I should be listening? And when I listen, I'll actually have a better workout the next day because of it.
Totally. Well, often what I'll do is I'm feeling tired. If I am still going to work out even to this day, I'll do just a very a shorter version. Maybe I just say 2 sets per exercise or
Sure.
something like that, and drop it. I'm gonna drop in an analogy here because Johnny's not here, and I'm
Yes.
also a John, and I love analogies.
Yes.
Um, Also, I have to say, I got to give you guys a little plug because I'm super stoked to be on your podcast. Because I've been listening. I am a devout listener of the podcast.
John is an OG
And
listener.
yeah, and I definitely have found a lot of great stuff. I did my first float because you guys talked about that. I have limited my phone use. A lot of the things you're talking about are also kind of line up with this like climbing warrior book that I read as well.
Yes. Which I wanted to
And stuff.
ask you about as well, actually, because I know
Yeah,
we
yeah.
talked about you've been reading that.
Totally. And then also done some meditation. So I just want to say anyway, stoked to be here and I've done my research. I've listened to the podcast and but my analogy for working out, is when you're tired and you kind of feel like you're tired, but your voice is saying you should rest. But you're like, no, I gotta go. I gotta go. Because I think of it as like, well, if you're like a battery, right? You got to put yourself on the charger. If you charge up more, then tomorrow when you go, you're going to be more powerful. You're going to go. And if you have a better 25-minute workout tomorrow than a terrible 40-minute workout today, you're actually going to get more gains from that. Um,
Yeah, it's so true. I actually love that. I think that's a great analogy. I mean, you and I have talked again separately on the phone in our catch-ups just about like in the spirit of talking about rehabilitation and alignment. That's one thing I know I've definitely incorporated into my just physical fitness practice over the last couple years, more seriously over the last year, but the benefit of just sitting in static back, which is something that we've talked about many times on this podcast, like a 25-minute session in static back, or
and something
um,
I've adopted.
yes, yeah, I love the static back. Or another one is like supine groin stretch, which I know Johnny has talked about on here before. It's also in that Pete Ego Askew chronic pain book where we get like a lot of these exercises from. But it's amazing because you spend an hour, 75 minutes in these kind of like rehabilitation postures and old me, or I won't say old me, less educated, less knowledgeable me about the topic would be like, not that it's a waste, but like when you only have so many hours in a day, like I could have gone and done this like intense indoor rock climbing session or weight session or whatever. But really sitting and doing that 75 minutes, if I go and do like a heavy weight session the next day of like squats and deadlifts, it's leaps and bounds better. Like you can't ignore it. Like you
It's
can't ignore
amazing.
how much better it is, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, very interesting. So now, okay, so the rehab's important. I feel like I saw in the documentary a couple clips of you doing like foam rolling and stuff like that on the mountain. But I can only imagine when you have these really intense days, like I guess it depends on the day, but how many hours on average would you be climbing a day when you were doing Logan?
It's actually probably less than you think, other than
Yeah.
our summit day, which is quite long. I don't know if it was 12 or 13 hours. Most of the days are actually shorter. Maybe you're moving for 4 to 6 hours. And that's because you're actually moving camps where you do this sort of pattern of bump up supplies, dig in the camp a bit, come back down, rest at the camp you're at, then the next day do a
Okay.
full move, and then do have a rest day the next day. So you're kind of
Okay.
completing this cycle at least for up till camp 2 or 3, and then beyond that we were going kind of a single push up the mountain, and that's basically just to adjust for altitude. So a lot of the physical hardship, yes, like absolutely the moving at an incredibly slow pace is super hard, especially at altitude. Like you can't down here, you stand up, you bend down to adjust your boots, you move your bag over there. You can't do that at that speed at altitude. You actually get out of breath, you'll get dizzy. When I would bend down, I would actually squat because I'd get less dizzy than like bending my head down. So everything takes so much more energy. So the physical hardship too was also just in the cold and then just being in the tent, because we'd just be, when we're at the camp, we're either, sometimes we'd have a cook shelter which we kept making till about camp 3, but beyond that we didn't. And So there's only one place, which is kind of your tent, and around your tent, because you're on a glacier the whole time, you've probed to ensure it's a safe place to be. So you can either sit up in your tent and read the Kobo book that I had, or lie down or lie on your side or play a game of cards. And there was multiple days. We got weatherbound for multiple days, which is a very common thing. We had it pretty easy that way, but where you're just lying around, and that was physically hard because there's no back support. You're just sitting
Right.
there and you're just adjusting, and you can sleep, you could eat, you could read, you can talk, or you could sit there and think about your thoughts.
Stare at the tent.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that's actually a mental, like something mental I hadn't considered because there's no like, I'm assuming you have a radio for safety if you have to radio down to somebody for help, but it's not like you can just get on your phone and scroll Instagram or
yeah,
like have
yeah,
any, you can't just throw on the TV and start watching YouTube, right? Like, were there any days when you were up there where the physical stuff aside, it was mentally difficult to like either you felt bored or it was just
yeah.
difficult to sit with your thoughts?
Yeah, after we did summit, I'll let that out of the bag, but
Yeah.
I did when we summited that day, I actually got frostbite on my thumb from managing my camera on the summit. And so I was injured, and we didn't get off the mountain until about 8 days after we
Mm.
summited, because it takes a while to get down. We got weathered in. So really and so we summited on day 18. Once we were back in the tent there, and just waiting. We got weathered in on the summit plateau, so we had to wait to come down quite a bit, which really isn't in the film because it didn't make sense to include it all. Um, it was hard because at that point you're like, okay, we've been here for like almost a month. We got to the top. We've done it. I've like kind of figured this out. Ready to be home now, right?
Yeah.
And especially lying there with an injury, which I'm not sure how severe it was, and sort of managing that. That was pretty tough. Like I definitely hit a pretty big low there. I remember getting Justin Ryan to help me like zip up my bags and things the day we had to go up and over the Prospector Col to go back down because I was trying to keep my hand sort of bandaged as best as I could and protected. So that was really tough. And then also, probably one of the toughest times was on day 25. We were scheduled to go out, and there was another team there, Canadian Geographic team. They had the plane came in twice for them, and we put some of our gear on there too. And then we were waiting for our flight. And now it's about an hour flight to get there. And when these guys fly, it's a ski plane that comes in. They have to go over this plateau of mountains, and they don't even know if it's clear when they take off. They don't know until they fly a bunch, then turn. And sometimes it's clouded over and it's bad. They have to turn around and come back. So the remoteness of this mountain is you could be stuck there for a day longer, 2 days, 3 days, a week. There are
Yeah.
these insane storms that come off the Pacific that could do that. So we were sitting there on our bags on day 25, ready to go. And then we're waiting for that, sound in the distance. And it's like getting later. It's like 6 p.m. or so. And so we're like, let's get the sat phone out and call. And they're like, yeah, sorry, I had to turn around. So we had to unpack our bags, reset up the tent, climb back in, and
Oh,
like go to sleep, hoping that the next day would be clear, not knowing if it would. That was kind of tough.
when you're like so close, you can
Yeah,
almost touch it, and then it's like, just kidding. You have to stay here for
yeah,
another night.
yeah.
Wow. So how do you cope with that? Like, is that where you start implementing some meditation? Are you just like talking it out with your group and sort of like lamenting about it together and that gets you through? Like, because you do like it's still dangerous, right? Like less dangerous, I guess, than being at the peak, but you're still out in the elements, you're still out in the cold.
Yeah.
You don't know how long you're going to be there for. Like, how do you deal without that without having a breakdown?
Well, I don't know.
You're like, actually, I
uh,
had a full-blown breakdown.
it was definitely, I would say now I'm a lot mentally stronger. I mean, of course, I'm mentally stronger after going through that, but my mental practice with meditation and different things that I've sort of taken on. So since the expedition, because that was in 2021, I'm quite stronger, I think, that way. But the nice thing was Justin and Ryan were incredible teammates. We never really had it out with each other about anything, maybe tiny little things, but it was really good that way. But Honestly, it was like if I was having a tough day or time, which at times I did for sure, I kind of just like worked through it in my head the best I could, and you know, and read like a ton of books. Probably read like 5 to 8 books on that mountain,
Hmm.
and just try to keep myself entertained and busy, and then also just trying to let go of what you can't control because you can't, and then also sort of delaying like with an injured thumb, I was like, it was very easy to spiral to think like, what does this mean, or is this a really
Sure.
bad injury, is it not? My thumb still works and it's great, and I'm cold susceptible to injuries for sure now, but I didn't know that at the time, and so but having your brain spiral into that negative thing will do absolutely nothing good for you there, and you have to keep it together. And I think because the stakes are so much higher on an expedition like this, and your location, like it is the most remote place I've ever been in my life. It is incredibly remote and beautiful and wonderful, and just it just was like it was required to get through that state, and that's I just had to get through it.
So like there's no other option. Like the
Mhm.
motivation is there's no other option. I just
Yeah.
have to do this thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
you could go walk like 10 feet away from the tent and scream. uh,
Like
but we
dip your
did,
head in a snowbank and
yeah,
then yell
yeah.
because there's no pillows.
Um, we did have a satellite phone. We check in with the sort of flight company every day for weather and that sort of stuff updates. And we did use that at times to call family members and friends. And that was a really nice thing to sort of lift the spirits and sort of change your mental framework a little bit, because a lot of tent time, hanging out and waiting to acclimatize or waiting for the weather to clear, that really did help quite a bit, just to be able to chat with somebody or my family, and
For
also pretty
sure.
cool to call them from like such a remote place and
Oh
all
my
that. So
gosh, absolutely. That's amazing. So I guess getting back to so we kind of covered some of like the physical training aspect of it, but I'd love to hear more about like how you train to do the actual filmmaking part of it. Because like you said, that's a whole other separate skill. So, I mean, I know from you, I've always found you to be an amazing photographer. Like, I don't know if your Instagram is public, but if I can give it a little shout out, at John Bestfather on Instagram, like you have amazingly beautiful pictures of these mountains that you've climbed and a variety of outdoor expeditions that you've done. So I know from that that you've always been interested in like photography, videography in some capacity. Um, and then we kind of talked about when I was introducing you there how you got involved or into this program with the Banff Film Festival filmmakers and you got to learn from some people there, but that was after you had climbed already, right? So how do you even learn like what equipment you need? How do you plan this out? Because this is a whole other skill set. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is I think so many people are intimidated by taking on a new skill set, whether that's a new job, whether that's learning a new language. I mean, it could be whether that's learning a new hobby, a new sport, right? I think so many people feel intimidated sometimes to just start. And that's really, I think, what it's about is just starting and you figure it out. But like, how did you even start? Like, how did you figure out what equipment you needed, the time, like how to do the angles while you were
hmm.
up there? Like, how does this start? How did you do it?
Well, I mean, if you probably think like, oh, it was something super organized, but it really, this was more of a formative experience than a performance, if that
Okay.
makes sense. Yes, I've always been involved, always really enjoyed photography and videography, making little GoPro videos for my friends and that sort of stuff. I'm sure you've seen some of those little ones. Um, and then I actually was with do your taxes. That's what I'm going to say. No, I got a tax refund the one year, and with those funds, I actually bought my first sort of mirrorless, sort of more amateur to professional camera sort of thing. And we did a sea kayaking trip to Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska with my friends, and I just filmed it all, just like filmed it all with no real like understanding what I was going to make. And then I just went at it. And I've always been a creative person within music. I used to do a lot of music stuff in high school, and I love music. I like the power of music. It really drives a lot of my filmmaking and how I approach that. And so for all that footage, it's not a very efficient thing when you film everything and then you just go through it painstakingly and figure out what you're piecing together. So I made like a 20-minute film for my friends about our sea kayaking trip, and they loved it. It was incredible. And I did little interviews as well, just at my where I was staying, because we're all just a group that hangs out, the same group we all have a potluck with. Um, and it was fantastic, and that worked well. But I knew I wanted to make something approaching Logan, but I wasn't sure what. And I also was very cognizant that I didn't know if I could do it, or I didn't know if it would make sense, or that, because there was no production. I was the production. I carried
Wow.
one camera. We had a couple GoPros. I had a couple lenses. I had my microphone, different things like that. But approaching the project, it really was just figure out as I went. Everything kind of fell together. It was really beautiful that way. I realized early on, because that sea kayaking trip one I did, it really was no story. It was great. It was just, it's like a journal entry. Come along on the sea kayaking trip. It's great. But
Sure.
there was no story. And I realized that what's the story for Logan? And it was actually focusing on us as teammates, us individually, who we were, what we represented. And I wanted to create the idea of, like, I want them to get to know us, and then we can sort of maybe be relatable. Maybe Justin's relatable to somebody who has a kid. Maybe Ryan's relatable to somebody who is a partner of somebody who does mountaineering or has gone back to a mountain. And maybe myself, somebody who's a filmmaker or something, like just something that would kind of latch on. And so I focused on the person. And I actually got a friend of ours, Eva Holland, an amazing writer, published writer. She's fantastic. She's a friend also at the potlucks. And so she's known Ryan longer than I have. And so I approached her to come on board with doing interviews, because I realized here I was trying to want to do these interviews. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to ask questions. And then I'm also like, oh, I got to run the camera too. And I quickly realized that, like, I have to run the camera equipment. She has to do the interview. But also, I'm one of the people. So having this athlete slash also filmmaker was like this clash that happened with me all the time. Not so much a clash, but just it was hard to sift through. Am I a filmmaker right now, or am I an athlete?
Mhm.
So I just figured this all out as I went. And, even he was like, oh, hey, we're going to do the interview. Do you mind leaving the room, John? And I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah. And it was the best thing ever for me to realize, because when I was being interviewed, it was just me and Eva in there too. And so it really just came about. And then I got a new lens, because I knew what kind of lens. And I just sort of watched like a billion YouTube videos on how to do this stuff, and sort of figured it out as I went. And a lot of things I bumbled on. Absolutely. So, like, oh, the audio wasn't as good, or this shot wasn't as great. But I think what I would call it, I counted as a success, the movie, the adventure, the climb, everything like that. But it really was just, I was determined to see it through. And that passion with this project is what trumped any hardship, because there was so many points where I had no idea what I was doing in audio editing, in color editing, in so many things I got shut down on, making graphics to show the mountain. I didn't even know how to approach that. I didn't even want to approach that, but I needed it for the film. So as this kind of grew, and then we actually did the trip, and I will say that when I was on the trip, I always told the guys, like, hey, us, and actually it's my really good friends, Mike and Becca, they said to me before, hey, John, are you going to climb a mountain or make a movie? And I said, I'm going to climb a mountain. And so that was kind of always like, I had the camera with me. I was always doing stuff and getting footage. But the climb came first, and being on a rope team. So you're, on a huge glacier that has giant crevasses. So you're a full rope like that, 70 meters, and we're tied, on the ends and in the middle with sleds. I would film from my hip, sort of film as we go, or I'd be in front, I'd drop it in the snow in a little tripod, and Ryan would pick it up in the back. And really, other than that, there wasn't much more to it than filming what was happening. And then once the expedition was done, we did post interviews with all of us athletes. And the other thing I did, sorry, I'm getting totally rambly because,
No,
love
please.
talking about this. But the other thing I did about is I realized that I wanted to talk to family members, loved ones, friends of us athletes, because I felt like I really wanted to get this film and to make it sort of a like an experience so someone else could relate to know somebody who's climbing. So I interviewed like multiple family members, partners, friends, that sort of stuff to shed light. So we did those interviews also before the movie and got their kind of, thoughts on the mountain. And then afterwards, we did the athlete interviews again. So over the course of all that, I had to learn, how do I use a microphone? What lenses do I need? How do I expose? How do I use a neutral density filter because it's so bright outside? How do I have to, like, what do I have to keep this? How do I do slow motion? How do I get all these things? And I kind of feel like I got through the skin of my teeth, but it did work. It came all together. And what's more, we actually summited the mountain and I captured it. And I feel so just so lucky and honored to actually have been given this chance and to actually have it come through like it did. Again, success, we talk a little bit about in the film, but success isn't just, it's not hitting the top, it's coming home, like, and having a good journey and learning, because we could have very easily not summited, and we owe a lot of that to the teams before us with Ryan and what they learned that really contributed to our success. So I was just lucky enough to be on that fifth expedition and we summited and I captured it. And editing, back in the editing world, I was way over my head. I knew what I wanted and the feeling and the emotion and sort of the story, and that drove me. All the other things, all the technical stuff, like, I in July of 2022, I like lost my mind. I was drinking 2 coffees a day. I was like here at this desk, like just editing nonstop. And it was because I had a deadline to a film fest I was applying to, but that was really good to have that because it pushed me to do it. But there's times, Jetta, I thought I was going to lose it all, like where my hard drive was going to crash and my backups weren't working or things like that. Like, it was the epitome of, like, you just have to believe in yourself and knowing and having that sort of vision of, like, I just want to share this moment with my friends, my family, the public, my teammates, and I just want to do it justice. I want to do our story justice and this mountain justice and, like, honor it. And I want to, like, at times, like, I hated it, but, like, I love it. Like, it's one of those things. And so, like, passion really pushed, I think, through a lot of these barriers.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, first of all, first thing I'd like to comment on is the fact that you're like, I was drinking 2 coffees a day like a psycho, and most people are just like, like to get me started in the
Hold
morning.
on. I just have to say that that's the Mocha Express, which was equal to 3 shots, which I only learned like after that month. So I probably was having like 6 shots a day. Yeah, I'm actually drinking matcha as we talk.
Yeah.
I found my better caffeine world now.
Um, but another thing I wanted to comment on is I loved the family interviews that you did in the documentary. Like, for me, I've never met your mom before. So seeing your mom talk in the documentary, like, it's almost kind of like one of my favorite parts of going to a wedding is actually listening to the speeches, because I like hearing the maid of honor or the best man or the parents of the bride and groom talk, because if you don't know the person's family that well, or if you haven't spent a lot of time with their family, or maybe it's like another group of friends that are in the wedding party that you don't know quite as well, it sort of gives them, or it sort of gives you rather, this different light, like it shines a different light onto a part of their life or a part of them that you might not necessarily be as familiar with. Um, and for me, so to hear like your mom talk about you and your sister being interviewed, and then of course your other friends in the documentary, I don't know personally, but just to hear their friends and family talk about them, like you did a really good job, like mission accomplished in how you and how Eva set up those interviews in just, yeah, making it personal and letting people kind of know like who you guys are outside of the training and the documentary and like the mountain itself. I think that was really well done.
That was a really big part of it for me. And I mean, actually, hilariously, my mom's interview was in Florida because they go down in the winter and rent a place. So I was there visiting them, and Eva was, I don't know where she was because she's traveled a lot. She was at the Yukon or BC or the States, or she might even been in like England or something. But I had her on like a FaceTime on my mom's phone, like on a little stand, and then the camera was there on my mom, so they were actually having a FaceTime discussion interview, which is like hilarious.
Oh,
But
amazing.
it's just you have to adapt and overcome. If like that was the only time I was going to see my mom because I was living in the
Yeah.
Yukon and she was in Ontario. So yeah, but it was really important to me to show the people, not only us as athletes who go on this journey, but the people that support us, because that is such a big thing, and there is a cost that everyone pays for being part of this. Where it can be touched by it in different ways. So I really wanted to show that.
Yeah, I know, I love that. And then also, I mean, just the passion that you're talking about, right? I mean, it's such a loaded question to ask somebody like, what motivates you? Like, how do you stay motivated? I do want to ask you those things, but how do you put it into words? Like, do you know what drives you? Do you know what motivates you? Or maybe a better question is there ever a time where you're unmotivated? Because to me, as your friend, I see you as a highly motivated person all the time. And I know obviously everybody goes through phases where they just need to like rest or they're unmotivated to accomplish something. But you, ever since I've known you, you are like go, go, go all the time and just seem to be this like hyper motivated person. So what does motivate you? Or do you ever find yourself in times where you're unmotivated and how do you get remotivated?
Yeah, it's something that, yeah, I definitely want to chat about. Motivation, like I think I've been lucky in my life in that, I mean, and I have to say also, I kind of want to say like it's a privilege to talk about this stuff and to be like, oh, how do I keep myself motivated and go after these big goals and that sort of stuff. Like a lot of people don't have lives that are like as easy or cruisy as ours, and have like a job and putting food on the table, but like um they have other things pushing them to be motivated in that too. But for myself, like I really uh I think it's just I learned early on you could accomplish whatever you set your mind to. And that was probably one of the biggest lessons of my life. And I think the most one of the moments was probably, or the biggest moment was actually cycling across Canada with my best friend Niels. We cycled, and that was something that it was very, it, it it actually, in the adventure world, it's not a crazy thing to do in a first world country biking across, but as an individual to do it, it's huge. And just watching that Google Maps and seeing that blue dot every time we were like farther along Canada was insane. And I remember when I said I was going to do it, and a lot of people, some not very many people, they say, "Oh, well, that's hard. Why would you do that?" And kind of give you the little bit of that negative spiral spin. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. And, of course, there's a
I'll
part of us
show
that's like,
you.
you let me show you. But, it hit that all, we started in BC, hit that Alberta border. And it's like, wow, we hit that was such a monumental thing to hit that first border, the provincial border. And then it was like, they just kept flying by. And we got to the end of the trip. It was 75 days. It was an incredible journey. And, there was hardship on it for sure, but it was amazing. But I really just took away from that. Like, if you just pick away at something really slowly, you can get it done. And most of the time, and what I've learned, this is not something that came naturally to me, but you, your biggest enemy is yourself, always. Your biggest enemy is your limitations you put on yourself. We have this society that does perpetuate a lot of these ideas, but you hold yourself to that. It's, we always will say, well, I can't because of this or this person or this situation or this responsibility, but those are things you're holding to yourself. Not, they are there, and absolutely there is things you have to be responsible for in life, but quite often it's are things you can push through if you choose to and prioritize to. I've just been lucky in that. So I think also working as an outdoor guide and bouncing all over. I worked as a sea kayak guide on the West Coast, ice climbing guide in New Zealand. Like I bounced all around, and seasonal work is, it's great. You work seasonally, and then you don't have a job, and
Mhm.
then you have to go cold call or get a job, or especially, and I've done this even since moving down here. I move first, get the job after, and I just know or have faith in myself that it's going to work out. And that's where I really see it's hard for people. It's really hard for people to make changes in their life when they're just like, "Oh, that's not going to happen." They think that they can know the end result from sitting where they are, which you absolutely can't. Um, Even if you go and you strike out, and you don't, you don't complete something, you don't get this big objective, I guess, it's that quote, it's kind of lame, but like, shoot for the stars. If you miss, you'll land like up there. I don't know, I'm messing it up, but
Yeah, no, no.
um, like you have to go for things, and failure is such a big, important thing. In our society, we really, really think failure, we teach that it's wrong. Like I was brought up, oh, failure is wrong. Oh, you got an X on this. You learn so much more from a failure than you do from success every time.
Yeah.
Failure should actually be sort of celebrated. Anytime you like, oh, it didn't work out, like you've learned something that's going to carry you forward and going to make you the person, like who you are today is basically a culmination of your failures and successes. And your failures probably taught you more than your successes.
Yeah.
Successes are great, but the failures have said, hey, don't do this, don't do that. Hey, you remember that? Whether that's relationship, that's money, that's job, that's personal life, that's training, fitness, how, like anything. You really learn a lot from all these things. Um, so I just, yeah, like motivation is such a big thing. But the problem with motivation, or the problem with, or not problem, the challenge, I should say, for most people is it's hard to start. It's hard to start anything.
Yeah.
It's, as you said, it's like, it's daunting. You're scared, or you don't know what you're doing. I don't know how to make a film. I don't know, like all these things. But you kind of have to generate your own momentum in the start. It's no one else is going to do it but yourself.
Hmm.
You can, and I mean, you can get a lot of support, like even like listening to something like your podcast. Like I listen to a ton of podcasts, I watch a ton of videos, because I do apparently give a lot of motivation to people. Like I've always been told that. But if my motivation cup is being drained by others, how do I refill my motivation cup?
Yeah.
And like, so sometimes a lot of it was like when I'd work out, I'd put on like those like really sports, like lame motivational speaking videos and all that stuff. And it would just get me so excited about working out. And it just filled me up watching ski videos, people make all these things. So that filled me up. That made me charge me up. And finding those little things that can help you anytime you feel like super, super motivated or excited or all that, like hang on to that. Be like, wow, okay, make note of this. I need to do this or tap into this more. You're always going to have people in your life that like such as yourself, Jenna. Whenever I talk to you, I always feel super motivated talking to you, and like life, and feel energized and feel this like buzz. Like you got to like latch onto those people and be like, yeah, got to talk to them like every 2 months.
That's so sweet,
So,
because I feel the same about you. But it's, yeah, I mean, if I can share an anecdote, a story that I remember about you. This was years ago. So this was the night that you were, I can't remember if you had applied yet, or maybe you were in the process of moving to the Yukon. So you were like looking for jobs out there and thinking about moving. And you came over here for dinner and you made me
oh yeah,
delicious pasta. And I was helping you go over some ventilation notes because you were thinking about like signing up for the CCP program, sorry, and getting into all of that. And so we're pretty lucky. I think it's true for most EMS services, certainly in Ontario, but there are options to not do it full time, right? Like you can drop to part time. The service that I work for, it even there's like casual positions available now, same in hospitals and healthcare. So it does sort of provide you with opportunities to, travel and go and try other things, but still have this safety net of like, well, I have some source of income. Like I have an employer that I can always come
yeah.
back to. And I remember when you were preparing to go to the Yukon and you were over here for dinner, I had said to you, I'm like, well, why don't you just keep it part-time? Like, and then if it doesn't work out or you don't end up getting the job you want or whatever, like you can just come back here. And you said to me, you're like, I can't give myself an out to come back. And that always stuck out, like truly was so motivational to me and really stuck out to me. And I will never forget that moment. Like just I don't want to have one foot in and one foot out. Like I need to jump wholeheartedly with both feet into this new life, whatever that looks like in the Yukon, wherever I end up living, whatever job I end up acquiring, I need to give that my all, because if I keep one foot here, then I'm always going to be inclined to fall back into this. And if I really want to go for it, like I need to 100% go for it. And I just always found that like incredibly inspiring.
I'll tell you, yeah, that's it's actually an analogy that I was going to bring up about motivation and making, I would say not so much motivation, but making changes, which usually motivation is around making some sort of a change, whether that's small or big. Um, I call it the lily pad analogy. So you're standing on a lily pad, you got both feet on that lily pad, and there's like a bunch of other lily pads all around you. And a different one could be like a different life, could be a relationship, could be a job, could be a move, could be all these things. And I think we're sort of conditioned to think, okay, well, I got to get that job before I move. I gotta have that certainty. So what we're doing is we're reaching out with one foot. We're trying to like stand on that lily pad. Just think of it as an actual lily pad. You can't put your weight on it. There's like no way. And
Too
so you're now
unstable.
standing between the two, and you're trying to like go there, and you're like, I want the answer before I do the work and I'm there, or but before I commit to it. And the only time you actually know is when you stand on it fully. And absolutely, if you are still, you're trying to commit yourself to something and you're still hanging on or not fully going for it, you're actually not going to have the focus or attention or time or energy or drive. Part of leaping into something that you want to do gives you the drive because you have to. We live in, us, like we live very privileged lives. Like, for me, oh, I moved somewhere, it didn't work out, had to move somewhere else. Maybe I had to come back at my old job. Like, that is that's nothing. Like,
Yeah.
what am I worried about? Because even if it's a failure, as we talked about, or failure, in quotations,
Yeah.
because it's just a thing, we've learned so much because you have to go things. And there are many people that have a lot of things in their life, right? They have relationships, they have kids, they have a house, they have car payments, they have all this stuff, they have family, all these things. I mean, I'm a queer male. I'm single. Like I got a dog. I'm building a van to live in it. Like, on the surface, pretty easy to say like, oh, I've got less things, responsibility wise. And absolutely, it's probably been easier for me to make changes. However, I would challenge anybody to think if you have more things and more responsibilities, if you're not living the life that you're happy about or wanting to make a change, you have more people invested that you should make changes to your life. You
Right.
should actually go for it. One of the biggest motivational books that I've like read is it's called like Grand Adventures. I think it's Alistair Humphreys is the
Okay.
um and it's basically it's about expeditions and it's about grand adventures, like longer ones, but often done on a cheap. And so the book is it broken into what sort of like holds you back, and it sort of talks about money and relationships and things, and kind of breaks down how those can be sort of gone over. The rest of the book is all quotations from people on giant crazy adventures, like families biking with their children around the world. Like, oh, we just had another kid, oh, we're teaching them in Malaysia, we're doing this. Like,
Yeah.
I read this, it's got the quote from that I'm not sure how old she was, the 16-year-old that sailed around the world solo, things
Oh
like
yeah.
that. And just things that you read, and the ones with kids struck me the most because she said something. I wish I had it here, I'll have to find it, but like, you know something about like, like people judge us like so harshly, or say you can't do this, but she's like, but I can do it, and watch me do it.
Yeah.
And like, we really really buy into this, and everybody else and all these other things, we sort of say, oh, that's why, or here's my justification. But there are oftentimes people are holding you back, or that sort of things, or a situation. But most of the time it's you. Most of the time it's really up to yourself to push through that, and that's the super hard thing to do. And it's really really important to push through, because it's like anything in life, it's a muscle. The more you actually exercise it, the better you will get at it. And so that to me is why I think I've been relatively successful in pushing myself, going on to do the next thing. And to others, I seem like this crazy, hyper motivated person that's just on this upward journey. Do I have lows? Do I have times where, yeah, like I was the Logan footage, there was months here, I didn't touch it. Like I didn't know what to do about it. I just thought about it. And, I was like, and I felt stressed about it. It was like this big thing on my shoulders. I got depressed about it. Like, there was times when I thought I wasn't going to make it. Like I bawled my eyes at like, but you just keep pushing through. That's life. Life's not easy. We are in a bubble world where we're sort of like, you know, given such easy things all the time of heat and comfort and shelter and food and all that. We don't have to fight for any of this stuff. And like, really like we're designed to challenge yourself. The more you challenge yourself, the more you actually learn about yourself. The more you fail, the more you learn, the better you will feel. We're designed, to go out there and fight the saber-toothed tiger or whatever, right? Like
Yep.
we're designed to do that. And I think in our society, in our day and age, we've sort of lost touch with that. And we get so into our screens and our things, and we get overwhelmed and we get anxious and all that because we're just don't sit and live and meditate in the moment and just be happy and to push and to really find out what's possible, because only you know what's possible for yourself. And you probably don't know because you can push yourself further than anything you thought possible. And it is doable. And even if you don't get that lofty goal that's way up there, you're going to land somewhere where you're way better off than you were. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, we should. I think you bring up so many good points about how now we're talking in, first world North America. Like obviously there's other places in the world that just living day to day is an absolute struggle. So yes, we are blessed to have these problems and be able to have these conversations. But I think we're just used to being comfortable, and really there is so much growth in discomfort and being uncomfortable. So how do you push yourself to be more uncomfortable, especially like you're saying in a society where failures are sometimes seen as failures, right? Like we strive not to fail, but I couldn't agree more just from, experiences in my own life. Like I've learned the most things from the times where I've failed. And that's true. Like, I mean, on a way more subdued scale, like this is something at work I'll teach my students all the time. Like if they make a mistake, I'm like, we embrace mistakes, like make mistakes here while I can watch you and hopefully I don't also make a mistake. And if I do, that's cool too, and we'll figure it out, right? But you're going to learn so much more from the mistake, and you probably also won't make the same mistake again.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's super important. Um, Also like celebrating your success, however small they are, like
Mhm.
that's really important. Like change takes time. Like when you're making a change for yourself, like it's harder at the start once you kind of get on track. It's actually like climbing too. When you first start climbing, it's really hard. Then all of a sudden you get on this track, and if you ever climb with somebody who's like really just getting into the 5/8s, 5/9s, like really going, they're like have this zeal of life because they're just like things are happening. The work they're putting in is showing results. Then you kind of plateau for a long time, and then there's like this other one. So it does take time. And so when you have successes, and you have to stop and look at those, like I have myself, like I can be so hard on myself, and sometimes someone's like, John, look at this, look what you are, look what you're doing. And I've had to take a step back and learn to do that, because it is super important to really reflect, because we're just racing off and we've got our head down, we're going, going, going. You don't actually stop and look up and enjoy your moment, or like take a breath, or, enjoy with a friend, or have a night off of training. Like, why are you doing this? Like, this
Yeah.
isn't torture. And being gentle with yourself. I think there's a Brene Brown. I think most people have probably heard of her book. And well, she has many books, but one of them was it was really good. It caught me when I read it. It was like, talk gently to yourself. Like, what's your inner monologue to yourself? And
Mhm.
usually, like most people, my inner monologue was not very gentle with myself. And so understanding that, or even starting your day with an affirmation of like, yeah, I'm gonna have a great day. I'm gonna do everything I need to get done today, and anything else is gonna be fine. We'll get it done later. And I do at times, I've said those things to myself every morning, and it helps switch a little bit, little positivity to just inject there. Um, and just, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. I also like the idea of sometimes when you're goal setting, this is something that I recently I wouldn't say I've been too much into mantra work as of recently, but there have been other times in my life where I've repeated like daily affirmations and done some mantra work. And The power of it is insane. Like I remember when I was doing RT school, so I would walk every day to the hospital to do my unpaid placement, and I would walk because I didn't want to pay for parking, like rain or shine, no matter what was going on. And I would repeat this same mantra to myself every day, but it was saying things as if they'd already happened. So I'm sure that's something you've, or probably most people have heard of before. Like if you say something like it's already happened, you're sort of tricking your body and your mind into thinking that it's already a reality and then it just becomes a reality. So I had some mantras about, finishing school, where I wanted to work, like some financial goals when I was finally done after doing X number of degrees, travel plans afterwards, like all these things. And I just repeated it like over and over every single morning while I walked a placement for 8 months. And they all became a reality. Every single one of them came to
Absolutely.
fruition. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The power of the mind and how you talk to yourself is super powerful.
Yeah. I think that's something I've tapped into more recently than I had ever before. Often it was like I just go for it physically and that sort of stuff. And as we get older too, our bodies break down. We have to do way more time recovery and yoga and stuff. But tapping in mentally, because I've been pretty active and kind of, I even using the word athlete, I chose, I don't know how many years ago, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call myself an athlete because that's
Yeah.
what I am. And it was just a very subtle change, but it actually helped me in how I look at how I take on things. And anyone can be an athlete. It's not this hierarchical thing where you can't reach it. So like the words we use for ourselves, for others, for things like that, they can often hold us back. So be aware of the words you use and be like open to thinking about how that affects you or what it makes you think.
Yeah, how you speak to yourself is so important. I know there's a quote that's out there. Honestly, I think it just like floats around social media. I don't really know who it came from originally, but it's something to the effect of how your cells are always listening. Like your body is made of X number of cells and they're always listening. So how you speak to yourself will actually like change the biology of your cells and how they react to certain situations and things like that, which always kind of resonated and I find fascinating. But yeah, that's great. I do have another question for you that's slightly
Yep.
off brand of motivation. I was laughing. I know you were too, but in a previous episode we were talking about light exposure and what it must be like to live in different parts of the world where there's minimal light exposure. And I was like, oh, and in a future episode, actually, we could ask somebody that who's going to come on the podcast. And you had listened and immediately texted me and were like, oh my God, I'm dying right now. But you are the person because you've lived in the
Yeah.
Yukon. And so slightly off brand from motivation, but because we have you here and I brought it up in
Mhm.
another episode, I need to know, like, please tell us about the light exposure of living in the Yukon. Like, how do you adjust to crazy darkness and then crazy brightness at different times of the year? And how do you regulate your circadian rhythm?
Well, I unfortunately don't think I lived there long enough. 2 years was not enough to get that down pat.
Okay.
Um, Not sure. And to give somebody, I'm sure some listeners wouldn't maybe know how dark it gets or how light it gets in the Yukon. So the Yukon is not quite in the Arctic Circle, but it does get very dark there. So the worst of it is, when darkest time of year, so November, December. So maybe the sunrise is at like 10:30 and maybe the sunset is around 3 p.m. or something like
Okay.
that. So still a bit of sun, but at a very low angle. So it doesn't have the strength, doesn't have the warmth, doesn't have the UV, doesn't have the vitamin D, all that sort of stuff. Um, and then in the summer at, around, June 21st there, the peak of it is like basically I was outdoor guiding for a while up there, like canoe guiding and camping. And so the best way I described it is it's bright enough that only between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if you were reading a book outside, would you need a light. And to
Um,
kind of give you that twilight light that kind of happens and then just gets bright again, that's what it's like. So there's the two extremes. Um, Daylight is absolutely super important as shift workers. I know you know that too. Like I dose down the vitamin D a
Yeah.
bunch. I know there was some people and some articles about COVID and that being helpful for that. Ever since then, I've always kind of just taken a lot of vitamin D because I did notice whenever like in December, even back in Ontario, when I'd work a bunch of nights, I'd turn into this grouch and angry and that sort of stuff. The best thing you can do is get outside and have the sun on your skin. Like not always easy if it's minus 35 in the Yukon or minus 40, but getting outside. So I have a dog. And so walking him whenever it was light, I would always be like, okay, it's 12 o'clock. Like I gotta go. I gotta walk now because I don't want to be walking in the dark. And another thing that I would do is for circadian rhythms, this kind of maybe relates, is for shift work specifically. I used to, when I first started, would like eat lunch in the middle of the night or dinner or that sort of thing. I'd actually cut that out and I'm like, okay, dinner's always the same time or around the same time. And I try to like not eat during my night shift or just snack if I need. I know a lot of shift workers listening here know what happens at 2 a.m. when we pass someplace when you buy something, but
Yeah.
you strive to not be like overeating or changing the routine daily. Um, but in the Yukon for light, they would have some of those sad lamps or whatever,
Okay.
right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we had those at the stations, which you could put on to put, the UV rays on you and maybe help. But I think the best thing was, good eating, good sleep. Exercise is so big because you get a big hit of dopamine, a big hit of like feeling good that you earned, and then getting out in the sun as best you can. But I really can't say with any authority because 2 years is not long enough for me to actually say that I managed it perfectly or the best.
Right. But the big takeaways are just, I guess, trying to keep a regular routine in both eating and physical activity. And then when the sun is out, you just try and get out there and absorb it for whatever period of time it's out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Absolutely.
Uh,
So
so John, like what's next? What's the next talk? What's the next adventure? Like what's going on next? What's the next plan?
well, I've kind of been in a situation where I've been a paramedic for over 10 years now and really, really been lucky in my experience and bounced all around. The filmmaking thing is a new thing and photography, but specifically the filmmaking is like a huge calling, which I mean it's probably pretty obvious that I love it. Um and I have a lot of ideas and a lot of different things I want to go for. The big challenge for me right now is when figuring out how to balance those two lives, or if it's time for me to step away from medicine more so I can invest and again get onto that lily pad fully to fully go for filmmaking because it's not going to go unless I go for it, right? Um, so I have a whole heap of expeditions and ideas of documentaries and shorts and YouTubes and all that I'm really looking to go at. Right now, I'm doing a lot of skill development in both audio, video, lenses, how I shoot, storytelling, how do I approach things. So I feel like I'm going to be hopefully on the shoulders of my previous projects to learn more. Um, in April of this year, I'll be heading with actually one of your friends as well, Kyle, a colleague of us, and one of his friends, Tom, and we'll be leaving on Tom's 37-foot sailboat out of Victoria and sailing up the west coast of BC to, I think we're kind of dubbing it Sail to Shred right now, and we're going to hopefully be doing some backcountry skiing and snowboarding off the coast. So it's going to be 15 to 20-day trip which I will be filming and trying to make a short documentary on. So that's sort of the next one, but there's many others and many other ideas. And I think in the next couple of years, I'll probably things will be starting to get a little crazy with what I'll be doing and a lot of stuff because I'm also building a van out to sort of like be a home base and to be able to move around and to film and to do that sort of stuff out of. And it just feels like a natural flow for me and to also be moving towards a position, and I think I'm close to that now, where I can go on some higher expeditions and be not only a filmmaker and an athlete, but I could also be a paramedic on that as well. So I'm trying to sort of find my place in that and to push into these trips and also it is tough as a filmmaker and an athlete or filming yourself that you know I don't want to be ego driven in this. I actually just want to tell genuine stories and honest stories. So that's something I'm trying to work through too now, is figure out like what kind of stories do I want to tell, or what do people want to see, and you know, also some international travel, and tell some stories where I'm not part of it. I'm
Mhm.
just a venue for them to be heard. And I think, but I think a blend of all these different things is really where I'm headed. So yeah, I don't know. Put the gear in the car, and the skis and the bike and the climbing gear and all the video stuff, and just drive away. And you know, just like I said to you, like, well, whatever. I don't know. Just got to go for it.
Yeah, just got to jump off that lily pad. I love it.
Mhm.
Where can people, for anyone that hasn't seen the documentary, how do we get our hands on it?
I'll actually, there's a link. I'll send it to you. And maybe, are you guys able to put things in show notes now?
Yeah,
I think.
we can
Okay.
add
Yeah.
comments on Spotify, so I'll
Yeah.
put a link to it there. I
Sweet.
know I first watched it on Vimeo. Is it still
Yeah.
available on Vimeo? Yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
put a
It's
link to
still,
that. We'll put a link to that in the notes for sure. And yeah, just thank you for doing this so much. I genuinely have been looking forward to this for a long time. Our
yeah.
first guest, hopefully we can have you again on in the
I'm
future.
honored.
Perhaps I'm a little bit biased being a friend of yours, but I absolutely loved your documentary. I thought the story was incredible. For your first go at making a movie, like the quality is incredible. I feel like such a proud mom. Like I've shared it with so many people, and it's honestly just an honor to again be in your presence and celebrate your success. And I just can't wait to hear about the other adventures that you go on, but also see more movies in the future for sure. So please just keep being you and keep being motivated and keep going.
Well, thank you, Jenna, and thank you to Johnny as well too. I'm sure he's up there. I hope
Yeah.
he's feeling all right. But thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be on, and excited to hear other guests on here too. It'd be a privilege to come back. But there's lots of people, and yeah, your podcast has been a really good thing, really good inspiration. I think probably too because we're from a similar area. We work in a similar sort of industry, or we work in the same industry. But you know, and we have a very, and age wise too, I think we have a lot of the same things that we're going through in life. And hearing Johnny's sort of limelight on like a lot of his clients or what they're struggling with, it's like it's really like brought it home that, like, you know, a lot of us are dealing with these things and have trouble pushing ourselves and staying happy and getting things done. And I think things like you guys are putting out there, like, it really is amazing to hear your guys like what you'd say. It's fantastic. And as the first guest, I have to fill you with some praise that you guys are doing a great job. So keep going with your stuff, because I know it's not easy sometimes to keep going and make it happen, especially with a little one on the way. So good on you for
Yeah,
going
we'll
for
get
it.
the little one on the podcast too. The podcast in the next few months will you'll just hear like cries in the background, and we'll have to do a lot more pausing and editing. But
Yeah,
yeah, no, honestly, it's been great. And honestly, it's kind of a page out of your book, which funny analogy given that it's called the instruction manual, but I think it's just about starting, which is something that you touched on, right? Like I know when we started it, it's just we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to make the tech work. We don't know. I'm not the techie one. I'm like, I don't even know how to upload onto Spotify. Like, what is this all about? And I think it comes just from starting somewhere, like just starting, right? The perfection does not exist. Nothing is perfect, but just how do
absolutely.
you motivate yourself to start and learn. And yeah, the fact that I get the chance to, I mean, anytime we talk on the phone, it ends up being a multi-hour conversation about
Yeah.
the best stuff. But the fact that we can, put it on video and audio and actually have a recording of it is really special, and just really appreciate you and your time.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Jenna. It was a pleasure.
Amazing. Yeah. And